Greetings, fellow hobby traveler. Today I'm going to show you how I took this 90s Chaos Warrior model and turned it into a beautiful mini diorama, and how I used strong environmental lights in my painting. Hope you have fun and enjoy this video. Alright, starting out I needed to do scary things. I needed to completely snap off a base because it was thick and chunky and I couldn't build my own scene around this. Next step was starting to prepare the base. So I took my 40mm base and glued on some XPS foam and cork to get the basic landscapes around this, the basic shapes. Once everything was neat and to my likings, I did a little test fit with my mini and up to the next step. I wanted to have a tree, and somehow I had the genius idea I could build it myself. So I picked up some twigs out of my garden, dried them in the oven, and then I tried to glue them together to get the optimal shape. And as you can see here, this has been lots of fun. Basically I needed to do a construction around this to keep it in place for the glue to dry, and oh god, that was annoying. You know, sometimes I have a rough idea of how I want to do things and then I just start doing them without reading tutorials or doing a proper plan or all this boring stuff. So I added some PVA glue to the ends of my stick and I sprinkled on some moss, flock, whatever this is, and a bit more to try to create some leaves. This has been mildly successful and I was not happy with how it looks. It needs to be thicker, it needs to have more leaves, so I went to plan B, which is cut out individual leaves out of paper. I haven't had footage of this, but here is my finished tree, which I added to a small rock and then glued to my base. After applying some texture paste, I added a few tufts here and there, and overall this was getting into shape. I could see the final project. With some leftover leaves, I decorated the scene a bit more to have it look more natural. And here you can see that we have a good mixture out of earth, out of grass, out of individual leaves. And this is my finished base. So now we're ready to prime everything and paint it. After priming my mini black, I started out with dry brushing some brown tones, which in the beginning was a rather heavy dry brush. A second dry brush followed with a lighter brown tone, still pretty heavy but covering a little bit less area than before. Next up I switched to orange, which now I try to focus a bit more on where my imaginary light source is, which is to the left hand side of the miniature. The final dry brush was with a ice yellow, and here I started to focus really on the high spots and corners. So my idea was that with the colorful dry brush going from brown shadow colors to the orange and ice yellow, I have a light foundation covering my autumn environmental light. And this also helps me in the later painting process to have a rough direction of where my light is coming from, where the shadows fall, and where the highlights will be. So I try to really focus on the left hand side to add the yellow touch. And here is the finished result. So now I can go to the fun part, which is painting. So I started out with pretty thin down paints and I started to work into the shadows. So I picked a really dark gray and worked on the individual parts that are more in the shadows, that are more brown right now. And I painted over them. The idea I had was by using thin and more transparent paints, I can make use of my underpainting, of my colors I established with the dry brushing, to give everything this kind of yellow-orangey atmosphere to it without having to do too much work to the actual paint, so you can always see it lightly shine through. Here I approach with the lighter layers, which I focus towards the yellow parts of my miniature. And also what I did when mixing the colors was, additional to adding black to get it dark, I added lots of browns and I basically mixed in light yellows to get the lighter tones. The boots I painted in a more traditional leathery brown with a slight addition of orange to give it a bit more warmth. The same color was also used on his fist to give it really a leather glove feel. For the axe handle I picked a slightly desaturated brown to give in some variation here and there. You can see how I'm basically just repeating where the lightest dry brush is to set my final highlights. And you can also see how the light is really giving this sunset atmosphere, everything in this light yellow-orange. For the horns and the little skull elements I used bone color mixed with a little bit of yellow to give it a warmer touch. Then I realized the axe handle was lacking something, so I added a layer of Agrax Earthshade to give it a bit more of contrast. For everything metallic, I knew I really wanted to go with non-metallic metals, so I really tried to push myself. I started out by adding a really dark blue as my shadow color, as my dark color in here. Mixing it up with lighter tones and gray, I started to work my way towards the highlight parts, really working with the thinned down colors to get somewhat of an even blend. And then I mixed in more yellow and gray to really get the light in here, so it gets like this kind of reflective look on it. And I really needed to work with lots and lots of layers in here to make it somewhat convincing, even though the underpainting was doing a good help with guiding my brush strokes and guiding my use of color. Going into a really light gray, I could start to really set the reflections on the edges of my weapon. And I really tried to focus on the parts where I felt like, okay, this is where I want to have it a bit more shiny, so to say. Again, I used multiple layers to make this a bit more convincing, and you can also see that on certain parts of the axe I worked in reflections in the middle to get a bit more of this NMM feel. For the final highlights, for the top spots, I think I worked with a pure sky gray, ditching a bit of the yellow to get a bit more of this shininess into my axe. Last but not least, I was painting the tree and the base, and to be honest, this is where I cut corners a bit more. So I used Army Painter speed paints to paint over my dry brush base layer, and actually it worked quite well in getting the atmosphere and getting the base colors shine through the layers. So I actually was able to relatively quick paint over all the things, using a bit of a brown orangey leather tone for the tree and the wood, using this tone as well as light greens for the leaves and for the grass tufts, and a more earthy brown for the earth in between, and also a grey with a slight hint of blue I think mixed in to get the rocks done. The important part to sell the autumn atmosphere here is to really go with the warmer tones and also be careful with the greens you use. Not too much green, and really add in a bit of yellowy to the green, so to make it a little warmer and a little more of this autumn feel. And here is the finished piece. I really hope you did enjoy this video, and since it's my first try with YouTube, I would really appreciate any comments or hints or anything you'd like to tell me about this, and maybe we'll see us again in the future.